Welcome to the Speed Strength Show. I'm Tommy.
And I'm Braden. And what is the most athletic track event outside of the Deca or Hepta or Penta?
Oh, that was going to be my first thing to say was the multis. 100%.
So I guess you could take it like what athletes would be best at like a variety of sports or best at a variety of track events would maybe be one way to take it. Or you could think about like which, if you were to train for one event, which event would prepare you best for a bunch of other events or a bunch of other sports?
Well, I mean, I'm going to sound really biased when I say this, but if you train for sprinting, it gives you the underlying ability for every other event, right? You have to go down the runway in long and triple jump. So you spend a lot of time working on sprinting. You obviously have to sprint and navigate the hurdles in hurdle events, and javelin you have to approach with a run and then throw. Pole vault, same thing. So sprinting is probably the most transferable.
I would say it's the most transferable to like team sports as well. The most team sports anyway.
Yeah. So, I mean, sprinting is a foundational thing. I don't know if it's the most athletic compared to all the other stuff. Pole vault's probably the most technical.
I would agree with that. Or high jump, maybe.
So I want to say sprinting because it's the foundation of everything else. And if you can sprint very, very well, it gives you the ability to do a number of things. So isn't that sort of what athleticism is? If we think of someone who's athletic, we think of someone who can do a whole bunch of movements and actions with their body.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. Like whenever I listen to strength and conditioning podcasts, they're always like speed is the number one thing everyone's going after. For most people anyway. Like not everybody needs to get faster. I don't think anybody would turn down speed though. You know, if they could trade one attribute for speed, then yeah, I think most people would do it. And you are right for all those other events, and it's still going to give you like the neural drive and the power to maybe be like semi-passable at the throws and things like that.
Yeah, you would think even the timing too, like getting the limbs to do whatever action at the same time and things like that. So I think for that reason, I would pick sprinting.
Yeah, I guess.
Even though it sounds really biased, that I'd be picking that.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a little bit biased, but that makes sense. I guess it kind of, to me, makes a little bit of sense to go with hurdles because it is all the same things you said, but I feel like there's just a little bit of extra coordination and like mobility and maybe like a little bit of extra power you need to get over the hurdles that you like sprinting. At least if we're talking like 100, you'd be so far in one direction, which like a 110 hurdles would bring you back a little bit. Also in my head is maybe like, I don't know what length of sprint you were thinking about, but if we're talking like a 400 or an 800, you'd still have like really high end top speed, but also be really well conditioned for, you know, a lot of like longer length, like rugby and soccer, like team sports. And then also like, if we're talking track, like the longer distance runs, you'd be okay at for sure.
Yeah. You certainly have more like bandwidth or versatility to do things if you were a 400 meter sprinter. Yeah. Because I mean, if you take an example of someone like Van Niekerk, who's the current 400 meter record holder on the men's side, he is a sub 10-second sprinter in the 100. Pretty sure he's gone sub 20 in the 200.
Wow.
And then he's the world record holder in 400. So I mean, you could argue he could be in the Olympics for any of those events. Like he's not going to be quite as fast as maybe the top people in the 100, but he could probably make an Olympic final if he's healthy.
Yeah.
And then he can stretch that speed out way further than any of the guys he's racing against in the one.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it too, like if if he has that ability, but he's also like he's training for the 4, right? Like you wonder what he could do if he was training for the 1 or training for the 2, you know?
But yeah, I do agree. I was thinking more in the shorter realm, like from a pure speed standpoint, because the pure speed is what's going to transfer over best to other events. Like your ability to hold station in the last bit of a 400 isn't going to help you in, pole vault as you're going down the runway. Although, because the field events have multiple rounds and some of it, like pole vault, for example, is 3 tries.
Yeah.
And if you complete it
at each height,
you keep going. So you could end up doing like 5, 10, 15, 20 jumps. Like who knows where you're going to be. So potentially that capacity or the ability to, be able to sustain that speed over and over and over again would be needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm going to stick with my answer of sprinting.
Yeah.
As the most athletic event in track and field outside of the multis, because I think without question it is the multis.
Yeah, that's why I had to eliminate them off the bat, because I would say
there's no convo.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say whoever wins the Deca, Hepta, Penta, whatever you want to call it, is like, I don't know if we talked about this on off air or not, but like the winner of the CrossFit Games is dubbed the fittest person on earth. But I would say whoever wins the Deca or Hepta in the Olympics is like the most athletic, I would say.
Yeah, there is that title that goes with people when they win that. They are sometimes considered like the most athletic person in the world.
Yeah, I would say so. I would say Damian Warner currently is the most athletic man in the world.
You could argue that is the case because he's the defending gold medalist.
Yeah.
So yeah, it makes it too easy if you pick that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to stand by sprinting.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just because, like I said, the versatility allows you to do so many other things as a result.
I guess, do you think there is any field sport that would translate really well to all the other ones, or not really? Or is field just the throws, or are the jumps field as well?
The jumps are field too.
Okay.
I would say that javelin would be my next one.
Interesting.
Because javelin's like an elastic throw as opposed to like a strength throw.
Yeah.
Like so something like shot put, you have it's a much heavier implement. You have way more time.
And it's a push. It's not really a throw. It's more like a push.
Yeah, compared to the javelin, like you get that loading with the javelin, and then there's that elastic component. So I mean,
plus you have the run up.
Yeah, so if somebody can sling a javelin pretty good, they could probably sling a baseball or spike a volleyball or throw a football, anything, water polo, all the sports you can think of where there's some sort of single arm, like whipping, throwing type motion, striking.
Yeah.
Would probably transfer really, really well.
I mean, anecdotally speaking, of people I've met more recently, there seems to be a crossover between javelin, volleyball, and high jump, all kind of being one athlete can do all those things.
Yeah, because if you think about the demands of volleyball, you probably have somebody that could figure out high jump or javelin, depending on where their strong suit really, really lie.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, that kind of nicely, like anything athletic, I guess, translates well into anything we're going to talk about on any episode. But I think all those things being very elastic and like full body, transferring force through the full body, kind of complex movements that way translates really well back into talking about fascia round 2.
Yeah, I would agree because, like you said, it's everywhere.
Literally,
like it's all over the body. As we talked about last time, like it's literally covers and wraps everything, like nerves, muscles, bones, all of that stuff. So it's everywhere. So as soon as you're doing some sort of movement that is global, it's your whole body. Like we're talking about javelin where you're running down the runway and then throwing the spear.
Mm-hmm.
Your whole body's involved. So then the fascial system is involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like you said, almost any athletic movement, any movement period,
Mm-hmm.
is going to use or depend or impact the fascial system in some sort of way.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and even just what you're talking about, like sprinting translating so well to so many other things. Like obviously sprinting is a part of so many other things, but just the way that it prepares the body for like instantaneous high degrees of force and transmitting the force like from the foot all the way up to the opposite shoulder, and then how that sling is preparing for the next step, and like there's the constant like counter movement, like stretch recoil, stretch recoil, stretch recoil kind of thing. um and how it makes like using that system makes the movement so much more efficient, and therefore like you're able to use so much more or produce so much more force than you would otherwise be able to in a shorter amount of time with less energy expenditure. You're talking about the guy running the 400, like imagine doing that with only muscles, you know.
Well, you'd be cooked. You would be absolutely fried by the end of it, like
Yeah.
100%. I mean, you already are.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with all the elastic return. So like you said, if you had to run on pure muscle, you'd be toast.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know if there's any points that you wanted to like just highlight from last time around, like how the system works before we dive
Yeah.
into it. I mean, it's everywhere. It covers and wraps everything. So literally everything we do is influenced by or influences the fascia in our body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, yeah, just all the connective tissue. When we're talking about fascia, we're talking about all the connective tissue. I guess we're focusing a little bit more on the stuff that connects muscle to muscle, muscle to bone, and like wraps muscles. We don't are in this conversation, I don't think we care as much about the stuff that wraps the organs and cushions the organs and things like that.
It's
But yeah,
obviously important, but not in our context.
yeah, but yeah, wraps everything, it's everywhere, adapts to everything. Yeah, little cells laying down lines of tension, collagen fibers and elastin fibers, um, and they get laid down in the direction of the force that they're responding to, in like literally in response to force. And the type of collagen and the type of elastin is going to be dependent on the specific stress and force and repetition and time and all those things that you're subjecting it to, with like heavier, higher tension things resulting in thicker, like stiffer collagen fibers, and more elastic things would be a higher percentage of elastin and also like more springy elastic collagen fibers as well.
It's great that you bring that up because that's effectively why I think it's important to think about training.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to consider what sort of effect you're having on that, because like you said, it just gets laid down. And it's the movement, it's the action, it's the things that we do that actually influences how it's going to be built from like an architecture standpoint within our body.
And that also, like the fact that it just gets laid down, and it's the movement that like turns it into something useful. If there's an absence of movement, then like it still gets turned into something, it just ends up not being that useful. Like that's how you end up with the sticky, thick kind of layers stuck together and the crisscrossing fibers going in every which direction that like are resistant to movement in all directions, instead of ready to stretch and spring in one direction, which is more useful. If you had like your Achilles tendon, if the fibers were going in every direction instead of perpendicular to the ground, then you wouldn't be able to run your 400 because your tendon wouldn't stretch the way you want it to and recoil the way you want it to.
No, and then you'd end up in that scenario where you talk about running on all muscle because you get very little return.
Yeah.
I mean, so what were some of the big things that stuck out to you as far as like we dove in, we read a bunch of stuff, we read a number of papers, we watched some presentations, things like that. Like, what were some of the big things that stuck out to you from a, not a function standpoint of the fascial system, but from like a movement and like training perspective?
Well, one of the first things that Thomas Meyer said was that it takes a lot longer to adapt, like to meaningfully adapt anyway, than muscle does. Like you can make a lot of meaningful neural adaptations to muscle in a couple of sessions. We know that, and you can make meaningful hypertrophy gains in, well, I guess what did we say was maybe like,
Was it
I think,
6 sessions?
yeah, minimum of 6, and I think 20 was like the meaningful number or something like that. But like
Oh
within,
yeah, 6 was the structural change,
yeah,
and then
something like
20
that.
was like for cross-sectional area.
Yeah, something, it was something like that.
Yeah.
So but I mean, commonly understood, like within 3 months you can make like meaningful hypertrophy gains, versus they're saying 6 to 24 months for meaningful like overhaul of the fascial system. But that being said, like it's adapting all of the time, so like you are making changes all of the time, but just if you're pushing the muscle, his point is that if you're pushing the muscle, then you're going to end up with an imbalance between the muscular system and the fascial system, because the fascial system can't keep up. So you have to spend more time early on creating like a resilient, robust fascial system, and then later you can push the muscles, and the muscles, like the fascia, will be able to stand up to it because you've taken the time to build it. And within that, I think somebody else was saying that it takes longer to build, but it's like anything else. It's a resilient attribute. It's more structural, right? So it takes longer to build, but it's going to last longer once you've put in the time. Same way we talk about speed, like you got to be doing it all the time because you're going to lose it. And strength is more resilient than that, so you don't have to do it as frequently, and it takes a little bit longer to build, maybe. I don't know. Depends.
Speed, I feel like, is the worst trade-off. It takes forever to develop, and you can lose it
Yeah,
like that. I feel like it just has the worst end of both worlds.
right. But because fascia is more structural, like it takes a lot longer to build, but it'll last a lot longer, and you don't need to do as much to maintain it either, I would say.
Yeah, and that aligns a little bit with what I was thinking. To me, the two big things that stuck out was that the fascia responds exactly like what we were talking about, and responds in different windows, right? Like you said, there's those immediate sort of what happens when I sit down in this chair, and then what would happen 2 seconds later if I stood back up, because there are changes that are going to take place, but they're not permanent. They don't really have any meaningful outcome, versus, like you said, all the way up to 6, 8, 12, 24 months worth of adaptation, where now it's become much more like structural. And I think that's a really important thing to consider within training, because we're always thinking about timed adaptation and the windows of times and things like that, because if we're not aware of how long it's going to take for something to develop or to be like expressible, let's say, by the athlete, then we don't necessarily know if we're doing a great job preparing. Like if I have no idea how long it's going to take somebody to get strong and fast, how are you going to have that person ready for a powerlifting meet or for a track meet?
That's right.
Because you need to sort of know your windows of time. So to me, the response is a really important thing to consider with training. And then also its ability to transmit force, specifically in that sort of elastic way that we've been talking about, where it's elastic, it's stretchy, it's susceptible to being lengthened out and stored with energy, and then being able to rebound back in a recoil type fashion because of what it's made of. So to me, that's going to influence some of the activities and the things that we would actually select to do to make sure that we're getting the fascia to glide, to move nicely, because certain activities then are going to, I think, have a better influence on that. Because if we're taking advantage of those elastic properties, as opposed to activities that may not take advantage of that. So to me, those are sort of the two big things that stuck out. Having, heard of the fascial system, but not really considered it, like, to the extent that we have, obviously, for like now discussing and chatting on air about it. But those are probably the two big things: that it responds, or how it responds, and then that it's very effective in terms of transmitting force, because that's going to influence the activities we pick.
Yeah, I guess like one bit of a dilemma, like starting with the time thing and how it responds. Some numbers that have come across, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, it was collagen breakdown is higher than collagen synthesis, like for the first 48 hours post workout or something like that. And this might be for like a fascia specific workout, but I'm also kind of thinking that every workout is fascia specific. So
It's involved in everything we do.
I don't know how that much that matters. And then it flips and collagen synthesis is higher after the 48 hours. And then returns to normal, I think like 5 days or something like that. So I've seen a few different things like that. Those might not be the exact numbers. But I've seen a few different things recommending like a fascia specific workout like twice a week or something like that, because doing more than that, and it's like a number of different, like the Pilates talked about that in the Joseph or Joel Schleep, that book. The Pilates chapter talked about doing it like a couple of times a week. Yeah, there was a number of different things that we're talking about doing it that way, so that you don't like, it's like the same idea that you don't train a muscle 2 days in a row, because you just keep training yourself down into a hole, which if you're modulating like intensity, I think it's more or less fine. But that's something that is in my mind anyway, because like it's very common to train, 4 times a week or 5 or 6 times a week, and doing full body movements 6 times a week. Now, if you're doing different full body movements, you're using different like fascial lines and fascial chains. So maybe from that respect, it's fine. But yeah, that was just one thing. I don't know if you came across any of that information or not.
No, so I'm curious what you came across in terms of like fascia specific, because I have a hard time wrapping my head around like a fascia specific workout because of exactly what you just said at the end. That
Yeah.
like almost everything we do is going to influence the fascia. And I could not even do a workout today. And I could just get up out of my chair, walk over there, go do whatever, pick up the laundry, make some food, and the fascia is being used. And
Yeah.
maybe it's
So,
not being stressed enough to make a change, but
well,
I
like
don't know.
there's like everything else, there has to be like a minimum effective dose, I guess, right? Where there's a certain amount of stress that is going to create that collagen. Like, I guess if collagen's always being laid down, then maybe it is only going to be in time, like when the fascia system is stressed, that collagen's going to be getting broken down at a higher rate, so maybe it's something to do with that. But like the impression I got from those like book chapters and things like that was that it's different than, like, strength training is not a fascia workout, not fascia specific anyway. The fascia is working in a different way, but like those numbers are still the same. Like I think the 48 hours and then the 5 days thing was specifically related to resistance training. But resistance training is going to stress the fascia system in a different way than sprinting, or a different way than like Tai Chi, or like stretching. Just like a mobility workout is going to stress it in a different way. So yeah, I don't know, that was a weird one for me to kind of think about. But I guess like the recommendations were like you can do your workouts that are for performance like 2 or 3 or 4 times a week, and then you have twice a week that's like a fascia specific workout where you're going to do more like specific like stretching of the like fascia lines, or working on like finding lines of tension, or like slower movements in multi directions, like tempo movements and things like that. Not like a tempo squat necessarily, but I don't know, like a really slow like lunge, rotate, reach kind of a thing. So yeah, I don't know, it's interesting. I'll make sure before the next one to look into that specifically. But
Yeah, because so like for me, kind of how I was thinking about, what were some of the elements that could specifically be like brought into training and work within within our training realm. I think as far as the time standpoint goes, it makes sense. You talked about sort of that 48 hours and then, you know, then being able to turn around and getting a couple of days of that type of stuff in a week. Because if I think of a typical week of any athlete I've trained from a speed power perspective, whether it's track and field, whether that's, you know, a sport like rugby or football or something like that, where I do consider there to be speed power demands, that you're getting some of that big stuff in every second day, right? You get 2 to 3 days a week of high velocity, high intensity, high strength, high tension type movements. We're not going to go into the weight room and lift heavy every single day. They're just going to fry the person or sprint super fast every single day, etc. So there's a little bit of that natural break in terms of the short-term changes that would take place, where if you have a high intensity day focused on, like you said, sprint or lifting performance, let's say, and then you have a lower intensity day where you can deal with maybe some of these things we're talking about. And then you come back to a high intensity day. And because it's stressing maybe different movements or the fascia in different ways, it's not interfering with one another. And then you get a weekend off, and that's your, you know, time away to, you know, completely let it remodel. And then of course, over time, you're going to end up with more permanent changes.
Yeah, that might be the answer. Like maybe it's like 48 hours in between, like the same kind of stress is maybe a good rule to follow. For now,
Yeah,
anyway.
potentially. Yeah. And so one of the interesting things from the response aspect of it that I came across was that like there's the 4 different qualities, or quality is probably the right word. I think that's the word that Myers actually uses in the book, and that fascia is like viscous. Viscous. That's it. Thank you. I knew I was saying that as soon as it came out. I was like, I definitely said that wrong. You dummy. So it's viscous, it's elastic, it's plastic, and it can remodel. And he introduced them in that order because that was sort of the time frame. So if you want remodeling, that's the longest. That's where you're talking about that 12, 24 months if you wanted to truly remodel and change. And then the viscous or the viscosity nature of it can change very, very short.
Yes.
Like that's like almost like in the instant, right? Where if I create a pressure change in one area by moving a joint or whatever, it changes it. And so to me, what was most interesting was that the next thing that adapts or changes in the fascial system is the elasticity. And given the athletes I work with, the sports I'm involved with, things like that, as soon as I see those 4 qualities, the one that jumps out at me is the elasticity. That's the one where I'm like, okay, that's the one where we're going to get a bunch of like the best bang for buck. So like what I was kind of wondering is, you know, it's a couple of times a week of, you know, doing things that are a little bit more elastic in a submax way, right? Not elastic in we're sprinting full speed down the track or something like that, but low intensity med ball movements, 3-directional movement that has an elastic component to it, small hops and jumps, things like that. Is that enough, but is that the minimum effective dosage for taking advantage of some of this in speed power sports? Because you can get the elastic changes that you're looking for relatively quickly, and then you just continue to work on those things, and then at some point it's going to enter that remodeling stage where you've now built up the lines in all those different directions you're stressing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. That's kind of the thought that I had about it. I think, like the viscosity and the elasticity, I think that they work really closely together, because from what I understand, like when it gets stressed, like stretched or like tensed, then the fascia, like it kind of like squishes all the water out and becomes like more or less viscous. I can't remember. And then when it like shortens again, then the water comes back in, kind of thing. So that those two things I think kind of work together. But yeah, that's kind of what I think a lot of people talk about is like starting with those low level like hops and skips and jumps and like those just like little things. It's almost like going back to the plyo series we did, where you start with like the quick contact, and when you have the quick contact, then you can build up and increase the intensity of those things. um but yeah, like I think so. That's how I would probably start if we're going after it in this way. Like that's not to say that you can't like sprint and jump and do bigger things as well, but if
I mean, I still would personally for
yeah,
like the training and stuff I was putting together for people.
and I mean like
I wouldn't want to discard that stuff.
no, for definitely not. But that's like that's especially like our job is to prepare people for their sport, and it's not like their sport is going to take a 2 year. Well, it kind of did just take a 2 year break, but it's probably not going to happen again. So
Unlikely.
we don't have 2 years to remodel before we start sprinting again. So, but yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense to do it that way in some capacity. We were talking when we went out for lunch like a couple weeks ago
Yeah.
about the extensive and intensive, and was there one other one? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, extensive, intensive, and reactive. Talk about
Reactive,
the
right?
red ball stuff.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the reactive was the more intense stuff that would be more akin to like a depth jump or sprinting or something like that, um, and then the intensive was the elastic, like repetitive stuff, and then the extensive was like the super easy. You're just like moving from A to B as many times as you want, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like the low load. And yeah, so to me, like that extensive med ball work, for example, like continually repeating, rotational throws
Yeah.
against the wall or overhead throws against the wall or,
Mm-hmm.
some sort of like lunge with a reaching and, like a reach pattern or something like that would
Yep.
all fall in that sort of like extensive
Yeah.
kind of category, which I think is perfect with the fascial stuff because it can take advantage of some of the elasticity
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
in different directions, but in a I don't want to say in a non-stressful way because you need stress to create adaptation, but the stress level isn't like high
Yeah.
nervous system demand.
Well, yeah, no, I would say that's like low enough stress that you can do it on a recovery day, which I think like the way that I'm seeing it is these like fascial workouts would be recovery day, essentially. Where you can start like that would be the most intense thing maybe you do on that day. Um, would be just like a big like a few big sets of like 20 continuous hops or 20 continuous like med ball hops. It's not high force production, but you're just like the purpose is to have that elastic recoil, that like pre-stretch, and then come out of it kind of thing, and like using your body in an elastic way. It doesn't need to be high force, but loading and releasing in an elastic way, and then getting into less intense stuff afterwards. But um, yeah, I think
Well,
that
and even
makes
the
sense.
opportunity to do things in multiple directions,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
Because I think one of the big things too with the fascial stuff, like when we talk about transmitting force, and it's important that we're moving in different directions. We think back to the last episode we were talking about like the adhesions, and you
Yep.
alluded to it a little bit at the start there, right? Where there's like the sticking points and things don't move super well. Well, if we only ever do things in one direction with one type of movement, then we don't prepare ourselves to move in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And we create those, and the words that they use is these adhesions that then prevent us from moving. So then through all this submax loading, for example, this like reaching and throwing and small hops and things like that, like yeah, do some of them lateral, do some of them forward, do some of them backwards, chop up and down, lift up and down,
Mm-hmm.
rotate side to side. Like you combine all those different planes of movement, and it's a good chance, especially for sports too, where you kind of get walked into one plane, where you can still allow the body to move freely,
Yeah.
regardless. Because, and you know what, it's important, maybe not from a pure performance standpoint, but as much as we think about something like, Olympic weightlifting or weightlifting if you're not in the Olympics, um, as like a sagittal plane, it's one direction of movement because the bar goes up and down and moves in the sagittal plane, or sprinting because I'm moving from the start line to the finish line in one direction. there's still so many things three-dimensionally that's going on. And, if you look at a lifter who has the bar overhead, well, they're stabilizing, there's rotation sometimes, especially on game day when they're pushing the limits. You see them take a few steps forward to stabilize the bar. And same thing with sprinting. You're moving in a linear direction, but there's a lot of rotation. There's a lot of, frontal plane stability. So I still think it's important that with these types of training, maybe not on your big days, but on some of these other days, that you still make sure the body has the ability to move in different areas and different spaces, because you don't know where you're going to need that.
Yeah, definitely. I would say, well, sprinting for sure, ton of rotation, ton of frontal plane stability. And you look at like the snatch or like a squat or whatever. I mean, good luck getting the bar from the ground to overhead without your shoulder rotating. Good luck getting in and out of the hole in a squat without your hip rotating. Like it's not like it's just flexing and extending, like everything is happening, you know what I mean? So you need to have that ability at every joint to rotate and like adduct and abduct and flex and extend. And like for sprinting and like team sports, I would argue that those like elastic omnidirectional low intensity things are performance enhancing, because you're preparing your body to move in any direction, which you're going to have to do. Like you have to move in any direction.
And it's going to happen frequently.
And then for the other sports like powerlifting and weightlifting and I guess those are the only two that are like, those are the two most sagittal plane sports that I can think of anyway.
Yeah, I would agree.
The health benefits that come from omnidirectional movement is also performance enhancing. Like being healthy is a performance enhancer, so it's important.
Yeah, like a good example of that was, there was a weightlifting coach I worked with in the past, not like it was a fellow coach, and he was obviously on the weightlifting side. And on some of the off days, they were doing these, like they call them multifidus twists.
Okay.
Which you were basically just lying flat, and you either had somebody anchor your feet, like you were flat belly down, and someone anchor your feet on a bench, or you could use one of those like Roman chairs or back extension machines, and you would lie flat to the ground, belly button down, and then you would hold a plate overhead, and you would twist and move through like the T-spine and rotate side to side. And they didn't load it heavy, but that's where he was talking about, well, that ability when you jerk or snatch the bar overhead, and you're dealing with that rotational demand that the bar puts on you. They're not doing that exercise to load it to prepare you for that. That's what you do in practice when you're actually snatching and jerking and things like that, and you actually have significant weight overhead. But that's still allowing that person to have that range of motion, have some sort of movement quality and smooth movement quality without sticking points and things like that. So it was interesting to see, okay, on this day we're going to build some capacity or the ability to do that movement, and to have, we can tap into it. We can tap into that type of movement. And then on the other day where we're actually loading and we're putting significant weight overhead, that's where we're working on the skill of stabilizing the bar. But if you only ever work on the skill portion, it's heavily loaded. Well, you're only loading the fascia in the body in that one way. You might lose the ability to actually get that extra little bit of rotation you might need to stabilize.
Well, that's right.
And things like that.
That's right. I mean, like if you don't take the time to work on your ability to move, then when you're practicing your sport, you're only going to move in the ways that you're proficient in. Like if you're, well, we've been talking about squatting. So if you're squatting and you have a little bit of a shift, then you're going to continue to squat with a shift, because that's the only way you know how to squat. And the longer you squat like that, that's going to continue to be like a tighter and tighter window. That's the only way you can squat until you take the time to learn how to squat with zero weight in other ways. Todd Wright talks about that all the time. Or Todd Wright and then Gary Gray and like the Gray Institute. And they talk about like just restoring movement options essentially, and making sure that people can move in any kind of a way. Because if you've got like, they're basketball guys, so if you got in like a post player that is used to pivoting off their left foot, and they can pivot really well and like do all their moves off their left foot, it's great for them. But eventually someone's going to figure out that, like, okay, they pivot off their left. If I can, make it so that they can't get their left foot to be the pivot foot, then I win. Or if,
Yeah, because you're putting them in a compromised spot.
yeah, or if I
Yeah.
like, they're on their left foot, so I block off this way, they have to go the other way, then I stuff them and I win. You know what I mean? So then you're bad at basketball all of a sudden, which is one thing. Like, you want to have those movement options to like have more options on the court, but they also talk about it from the health perspective, that if you are, yeah, like, you're strong on your left foot because that's your pivot foot, your right leg is not as strong. So then, like, all of the fascial lines and all of the musculature in your left leg is more developed, and then it's pulling on the pelvis in different ways. So then now you have right side back pain, or you have right shoulder pain because of like the way the fascia is pulling, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it can go in so many different directions, but from that perspective as well, and it's the fascia workouts. It's these like light omnidirectional, like, we're stepping in different ways, we're rotating in different ways, we're reaching in different ways, that restores those movement options. And they I think try to put more focus on the things that they're not, like, those athletes are not good at. So if you have, again, like, you're good at pivoting on the left foot, then you're going to do a lot of things that would mimic pivoting on the right foot, and just right foot stance in general, and getting used to moving on the right foot probably, and reaching and rotating in different ways. And even if you have like a go-to move, then you're going to do things that are the opposite of that, just for the sake of evening it out and health, um, and restoring movement options, essentially.
I really like that term, restoring movement options, because at least for me, then the next thing I think about is, well, you're giving the athletes more tools in the toolbox.
That's right.
And then when they're in their sporting environment, in their sporting context, they have more things to pick from. So when they encounter a scenario where they go, oh, I have to hammer a nail into this thing, they can put away the screwdriver and take out the hammer and use the right tool for the job. But if you don't give them the different things to pick from, then they have to use that one tool over and over and over again to try to do a bunch of different tasks. It's not really like that well designed to do.
The other thing that I think, like, the moving in a bunch of different planes in a bunch of different ways is important for this too, but like doing it with light weights and like a very variable tempos, and specifically slow tempos, I think is good. Like Tom Myers talked about this too, that just because you can do something fast doesn't mean you can do it slow, and taking the time to make sure you can do something slow first is maybe a really important thing, because I think, like, you've probably seen people in the gym doing like a single leg RDL maybe, or some kind of like a split squat variation, something that requires a little bit more balance, and they just like race through it, but if they slow down, they're going to fall over, kind of thing. And
Yeah, no chance. No
exactly,
chance.
it's one of those. So you're using the momentum to finish the movement in a way. And I think, like, when you do that, you're moving, like, by default. As soon as you go fast or heavy or whatever, you're moving in the way that is easiest to move. There's no way around that. And that's going to be like a pattern and like loading of musculature thing, but it's also going to be, I think, like, the fascia is going to stretch and slide in the way that's easiest for it as well. And the areas that are stuck are going to stay stuck, and they're not going to move. And like, all the areas around it are going to stretch and slide. And so then trying to do things slowly and really smoothly, I think, and to a variety of angles and rotations and full range and all of that, I think gives those stuck areas a little bit more opportunity to try to unstick, and focusing on making it smooth. I think, like, if you're doing a movement that you're not good at and doing it slowly and trying to make it smooth, it's hard, man. It's so hard. Like, it's shaky, it's jerky, it's not nice, but you keep
Especially if it's a
practicing.
movement that's well practiced for you. Like if you've done that movement a lot and now you're trying to go back.
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, add some of that stability or that slow tempo or that control.
Mm.
Like you said, someone doing their single leg RDLs for 5 years, racing through them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a well practiced pattern now.
Yeah.
And now you're asking, okay, just chill out, slow down. And
Mm.
it's going to be worse than someone who's doing it for the first time, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But and yeah, that's just another way to kind of get around the adhesions. And maybe it's not a performance enhancer, but then Tom Myers would argue that if you give yourself, like, allow your fascial system more time to like figure out how to slide properly, then you have more range and you have more capacity to store elastic energy, and you have more capacity to stretch and load, and you just have more. It's like if you compare it to muscles, it's like you have part of your muscles just not working, and you can drive home like, I need to make the part that is working produce as much force as possible, or you can take time and not do that and focus on getting your entire muscle to work. It's the same kind of idea in my mind anyway.
Yeah, and I mean it's the whole idea of like building a base and developing, you know, what you need. And as soon as you were talking about like, oh, the ability for range and stretch and this and that, then I was reminded a little bit of the talk we had with Dr. A-Rob,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
where, then it becomes a little bit, you know, specific to the athlete and the person, right? So if we think about that, that ability to stretch and store, energy, again, that's the aspect of the fascial system that, I'm obsessed with, because it influences the activities and the types of athletes that I train so well. But if I think of the elastic demands and the stretch demands on, a baseball pitcher, large ranges of motion, right? You really get a lot of whip on the ball, like a very, very elastic activity, where if you have somebody, you might need a little bit more range, a little bit more stretch than compared to, maybe I'm thinking of the stretch movement, like in the Achilles when you're on the ground, in terms of like changing direction or sprinting or things like that. So maybe with the baseball pitcher, you need to spend a little bit more time because you have this really large elastic movement.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you can spend a little less time with an athlete like a sprinter or someone who has to change direction, where it's more reactive because the window of time is smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So then the stretch and everything else isn't going to be as great. But it still highlights the point, like you said, that there's this ground level or base level work that you would need to establish prior to going into it. And again, it's going to depend on every sport, every athlete, every person, and their demands are going to be a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
But you can take that principle and sort of universally apply it in different ways based on what's in front of you.
Yeah, yeah, and it's going to be person specific, like in any sport. Like we talk about, the demands of a weightlifter are going to be specific to their sport, and the demands of a basketball player are going to be specific to the sport, and also how they play it, and different things like that. But that's a great point. Like bringing up the baseball player, I like that, because I would argue that it's even more important with like a full body. Like we talk about the way that it transmits force, was we haven't gotten all the way into that yet, I guess, but if you're like taking force like from the ground, like everything is a ground reaction force, and then driving it up the chain, if you have adhesions in your, I can't quite remember which part, I think it's sartorius is part of the chain that goes like the front cross body.
Oh, yeah. That would
If
make
you
sense.
have adhesions there, and then you're trying to like rotate and like open up your shoulder and the top end, then like if your quad essentially isn't moving, and like the bottom half of that chain isn't moving, then you're asking more of the top half. And like you already know that a pitcher, especially, their shoulders and their elbows are under so much stress already, right? And I actually remember, like, I shadowed A-Rob a few times, and he deals with a lot of baseball guys, so there
Well,
was,
that's what made me think of A-Rob as we were talking about this. I was thinking pitcher, and then
yeah.
specifically now I'm like, oh, this is talking about A-Rob again.
So baseball guys would come and see him, and like the one of the times that I went, like a couple of baseball guys went and saw him, and someone's coming in for shoulder issues, and his first question's always like how do your hips move? And then he's assessing how do the hips move, and oh, surprise, they don't move that well. Like good luck opening up to throw if your hips don't move. And then you're doing it all arm. Like every throwing sport, if we're talking about a real throw, like you need to drive from the ground and then rotating the hips, and then like that was another big thing that all these like books talked about in the fascial system. It's like sequential. It's like, I think they said proximal initiation, but it can be anywhere. Like it's step by step, like the ankle is moving, and then the knee, and then the hip, and then the torso, and then the shoulder, and then the elbow, and then the wrist. And like you're exponentially creating more force that way. But if you don't have, like, if you're missing one of those links, then everything above that needs to work harder. And then you end up with shoulder problems or elbow problems, and then you're done.
Yeah, and so that's what, yeah, like to me, it makes sense why we need to spend some time on these types of activities. And again, I don't really use the word fascial specific because again, I think the fascia is trained and used and it's adapting all the time. So the idea of using the term fascial training to me is a little bit kind of nonsensical in that way. But this idea of we need this lower intensity, elastic-esque, multi-directional movement as a foundation for a lot of different activities, I think is really important. And I mean, it's a big underpinning of my own training that I do with the athletes that I work with. And the lower intensity days, they look like that. I do a lot of submax isometric work to help with muscle working isometrically and to help create the space and the stretch for the tendon. And then I'm always pairing it with low intensity, low impact, extensive plyos, extensive throws, different three-dimensional movements in space with med balls or things like that to open up the range of motion and the movement options available to an athlete, and to train and prep it for some of that elastic activity, because then on the big days when we go after things, that's what we need to be prepared to do. So
yeah, I like that you brought that up too, the isometric thing. We talked about that in the plyo thing too. I kind of a little bit forgot about that just when when I started reading about the fascia stuff, and like I got a little bit excited and I was like, this is the only way. But I read something earlier today that reminded me how important like strength training and stuff like that is as well. Because like you get the energy back because something stretches, right? And if the muscle isn't stiff enough, like if the muscle is not as stiff as the tendon, then the muscle is the thing that's going to stretch, not the tendon.
The muscle, it yields to the tendon.
Yeah.
And then the tendon doesn't get to do any of the work.
That just like made me remember, like, yeah, okay, you do need a level of strength. And I think it's important to remember, like, because then there's the whole like you need to be able to squat 2.5 body weight to do a depth jump thing, which I don't know if that's true. Like, but you don't need to squat 2.5 to do plyos, like to some kind of plyo, because it's just about the amount of, I think it's about the amount of force. Like, and if the muscle can handle the amount of force that this specific plyo drill is asking, then I think you will get a little bit of stretch out of.
I mean, hopscotch is a plyo.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Our junior kindergarten teachers squat testing all their 5-year-olds that are in class to make sure, hey, you better make sure you can squat 2 times your body weight before you go play hopscotch. Like, no, that's ludicrous.
That's right.
Right. So, like you said, but the demands are so low.
Yeah.
Makes it okay.
And then I think you are, because it's always adapting, then you are teaching your fascial system to be a little bit more elastic because those are the demands you're placing on it. And maybe that's not enough for your Achilles tendon because it's so thick, but I don't know if that's true. I think like it has to be like you are stressing that structure, so it has to be. So I think that matters. And then that actually tied in with another post that I saw recently from Rugby Strength Coach on Instagram.
Oh, great stuff from him.
Yeah, and he was
I mean,
talking
all
about
of it, whether it's the legit stuff or whether it's just like the memes.
the memes.
Like,
Yeah.
I love all of it. I love all of it.
But he was talking about how, like, in his, like, the research that he's done on the athletes that he's worked with, I guess, if you're squatting like 1.3 to 1.7 times body weight, increases in strength are not driving improvements in jump or sprint performance, was his
Oh yeah, I remember seeing that,
opinion.
which makes sense.
Which does make sense. Yeah, like that's enough. And then so after that point, then what, like, it's not, we know it's not strength. And then from the Bill Parisi book, there was the guy with the specific force plate, Sparta, I think it was, something
Yeah.
like that, like a Sparta force plate, that had like the specific athlete movement signature, and the things that were contributing to jump performance on this force plate was the rate or magnitude of eccentric loading, the max peak force, which is kind of like your rate of force development stuff, and then the impulse, which is like your stretch shortening cycle, elasticity, ability thing. And I think he said that it was the strength, like typically vertical strength, like good squatters will have very high eccentric force, which makes sense, I think. And then the naturally, like, really springy, explosive, like he cited basketball players where the peak force, like high rate of force development, like just naturally, like you have the type 2 muscle fibers. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was the, like, people that were doing the full body stuff, like pitchers and javelin throwers and maybe volleyball players and stuff like that too, that were better with the impulse, because you have like however much time you need to
Exactly.
produce
There's no
force
time
there.
constraints.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting with that too was it was because they collect a lot of data. It was overhead squats was the thing that seemed to make the biggest improvement in the impulse, which I thought was really interesting. But to me, that just made sense in a way, like it's full body connection, full body stability, like full body control. And
There's a coordinated demand as well.
yeah, and it's got to be slow. It's like a lot of range and a lot of mobility, so yeah, I don't know.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the point about strength too, and the ability to produce force, because we're talking about this elasticity where connective tissues, tendons, things like that, they stretch,
Mm-hmm.
and now that energy is stored. But how do you initially get that stretch?
Yeah, you
Something's
need to
got to
start.
contract, something's got to produce force to put that movement, and then it's once you've got through that initial movement,
Yeah.
you can now have this energy return. So,
And the
a lot of that
stronger.
stuff is important. It's just how do you package it together? You need to be
Yeah.
fast. You need to be strong. You need
Yeah.
to have some range of motion. And it's the age-old challenge of how do we package it together in the best way possible.
Yeah, it's tough. When you were talking earlier about, well, we've said a few times, like this fascia specific workouts don't really make sense. I'm wondering if there are workouts that are like developmental or performance enhancing, that like you're doing the best you can with the existing structural fascial system that you have, and that's like you're sprinting, you're doing your strength training, like all those things are like you're trying to increase your eccentric loading and your rate of force development and your impulse with what you have.
Mhm.
And then your fascia workouts are trying to give you access or better quality access, because your fascia is adapting all of the time, but if you've like maybe your fascia workouts are working on getting rid of some of those adhesions so you can use more of it.
But it takes a year to remodel. So you're
Yeah,
doing the best with what you have right now on those other days, but you're
because you have
working
to.
towards that remodeling process. That's an interesting point. I never thought about it that way.
That's the first time I thought about it. It makes sense to me
It's a good
to
thought though.
think about it that way. Maybe we'll explore that one a little bit next time.
It's going to give me some ideas now.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I had
That's the whole
prepared
point.
what we were going to talk about next time, but now you've thrown a wrench in my plan, so I need to be adaptable now.
All right. Hey, wrench is just another tool in the toolbox.
That's right. You've given me another tool, and I have to figure out how to use it before we record the next episode.
There we
That's
go.
really what it comes down to.
Which hopefully will be. I think I said it last time, but I mean it this time. I think it'll be sooner. I think this time will be sooner.
Well, we're all settled in now.
Yeah, we're both a lot more
both settled in.
Yeah, very good, very good. I think that's a good place to leave it.
Would agree
for today.
It's going to segue nicely into whatever random, wild, probably potentially unintelligent ideas we come up with for the next one about.
Yeah, maybe they'll be dumb.
Stuff.
Maybe they will be dumb, and
maybe they won't, but we'll
maybe
find
they
out.
Won't. Yeah. So yeah, music then. Music is the next one.
Oh.
We remember how to do a podcast. Music is the next thing.
It's been a while, but yeah, it's like riding a bike.
Yeah.
Yeah, put the headset on, the microphone in front of you, and you just roll.
Yeah, that's right. So what have you been listening to in the last month or so?
Well, a lot. I will just pick what's been most recent.
Sure.
I've been listening to a lot of Volbeat.
Oh, I like Volbeat. Volbeat.
So, I mean, the reason is because I think, was it the last time I talked about there was the covers of the Metallica Black album?
Maybe.
They were celebrating 30-year anniversary of that album. It's a horrible album, by the way, but that's irrelevant.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
But yeah, so I was listening to a lot of Volbeat because Volbeat did a cover of one of those songs paying tribute to Metallica, and they killed it. It's way better than the original because the original is terrible. But Volbeat crushed it, and they just recently dropped a song called "Becoming" because they have a new album coming out in December, and it's the best song I've ever written. I think it's so good.
Wow,
it's
I'll
so
check
good.
That out.
It sounds like Slayer at the start, and you have like 200 beats per minute. And blast beat, just thrash metal, and then all of a sudden it turns into this like, groovy kind of rock, and then he's got sort of like Elvis voice going on, and then you get into this like Metallica bridge, and then it ends with another Slayer riff. You're just like, how did they package all this together? They're unreal.
That's interesting, yeah, because they always did kind of like how I remember them anyway, is kind of like a groovy, like rocky, groovy, like Elvis-y kind of a thing.
They have this like 50s, 60s sound and influence to them, but they're heavy.
Yeah.
So
that's cool. Yeah, I might have to check that out. Yeah.
I'm a big Volbeat fan, and so I've been listening to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I do.
Recently.
Yeah. Volbeat, I only really heard their hits on the on Octane back in the Pack days, but yeah, they're a good group for sure.
Well, I mean, we heard the Warriors Call probably like how many times over, because that was basically the theme song for Waterloo when we were there for our degrees.
Oh, is that right? When we went out from the tunnel for football, it was Kesha, The Warrior by Kesha.
Oh, they picked the wrong one then.
Yeah.
They picked the wrong Warrior song.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
What have you been listening to in the last month, though? I know for you, sometimes getting music is a difficult task, but you've had a month now.
Yeah, well, so remember the last time I mentioned it was the Bo Burnham special, I think, was what I said.
Oh, Jeffrey Bezos.
Yeah.
Just come on, Jeffrey, you can do it.
Yeah. So, and I held two things back. So before that, I had listened to or watched Yesterday, which is that movie where the entire world forgets about the Beatles.
Oh, I've never seen that.
And then the main character knows all the Beatles songs. Watching it, I personally I haven't heard very many Beatles songs, so the movie was good and the music was pretty good. I don't know. I have a hard time getting into older music personally. But it was a good movie. So if you like it, then I'm sure you'll think it was fantastic.
If you like old music that I don't like.
Well, if you like the Beatles specifically, I think you'll probably like the movie a lot. And I also, prior to watching that, had watched oh man, I can't remember what the movie was called, but it's the one where the Pakistani kid gets inspired by Bruce Springsteen music. And I do enjoy some Bruce Springsteen songs, if I'm being honest. A little influenced by my father on that one, but
I feel
That
like
was,
I know a lot of Springsteen songs,
yeah.
but I don't know. And like someone would show me, I'd be like, oh yeah, I've heard that song before, but I had no idea that was
Oh,
Bruce.
oh yeah, that's fair.
That's what I mean.
That's fair. Yeah. And then if we're talking about actual music, I just started listening to Ed Sheeran's new album. Because it was recommended to me the other, like literally like 2 or 3 days ago.
You run that quick then.
What's that?
You run that quick.
I was, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I was fortunate because my daughter was sleeping at the time. So then I was listening to it while she was sleeping on me, and she woke up after 2 songs. So I can only speak to the first 2 songs. But the first one was good and relatable to my current experience. And the second one I didn't like as much because I thought it was too like produced. I like Ed Sheeran's voice a lot, but the more produced stuff is not as nice. In my personal opinion, I like his live stuff a lot. So anyway, I've talked about Ed Sheeran before on this, but he's got a new album. So I guess 50 so far, I think 50% of it is good.
So based on 2 songs, 50% is good.
Yeah.
I mean, if 50% of an album is good, it's usually an album worth getting.
I would say so. Yeah, I would say so. I
mean, there are albums worth getting that only have 2 or 3 good songs. I have like 10 or 12.
Typically, I think for bands that I liked, I think I typically enjoy like maybe a third of the songs, something like that. So yeah, 50% is pretty good. Yeah, that's it. We're back.
We're back for real this time. We promise. We promise.
So yeah, if there's anything that people want us to talk about, then let us know. Still the same places: Speed Strength Show, Speed Strength Performance, and Braden Southern. And we will talk about them probably if they're good ideas. And until then, thanks for coming along, world. That was the Speed Strength Show.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.